Hi, we are back with the third video in my beginner series. In the last video, I had shown you how to cut stained glass and also how to grind it. Now, in this video, we are going to foil it and solder it. I've got my pieces from the sun catcher we had cut and ground. I had cleaned them off. Before you foil your pieces, you want them clean. You don't want any oil from your glass cutter. You don't want any water or grit from the grinder on your pieces. You want them nice and clean. Something about foiling that isn't discussed in a lot of books or videos, you need to keep track of the humidity of where you're working. Foil does not stick well if you're working in a high humid room or maybe a high humid area of the country. You want to make sure, if possible, have a dehumidifier going if you know it's highly humid. Dehumidifier or an air conditioner. An air conditioner will help pull that moisture out of the air as well. And humidity can also attach to your glass, and that can cause your foil not to stick so well. I have a gauge here hanging in my workroom. It's one of those thermometers with the humidity gauge on it as well. And I'm looking at it right now, and it's about 65%. Over the years, I've learned anything over 70%, you're going to have more issues with your foil not wanting to stick well to the glass. And I had those issues when I worked in the basement of a townhouse that I lived in. And so, of course, there in the basement, I put a dehumidifier in, and that helped greatly. So with that said, let's talk about foiling the glass. I have my dispenser here, and aside from the scalloped foil, all these other rolls of foil I have, they're all 7/32 wide. As beginners, I would suggest either 1/4 inch or a little bit narrower 7/32 inch is a good foil to start with. There is smaller foil those are nice for if you want thinner solder lines on your pieces, or maybe if you're working with a piece, maybe there's a detail piece in your sun catcher you're working on that's really, really tiny. You can use a narrower glass or narrower foil on that glass, because if you use something wider, it'll end up covering almost that entire tiny little piece. So it's always good to have different sizes on hand for such things. Now, I had said all these were 7/32. There are different color backings on copper foil. There's regular copper, which is copper both sides. Say you're working on some transparent glass where you can see the underside of the foil. You need to think about what finish you're going to have when you're done. Are you going to leave it solder silver? Maybe you're going to want to black patina it or copper patina it. When it comes to that and foiling those more transparent pieces of glass, there is silver-backed foil and black-backed foil you can get in those different sizes, the 3/16, 7/32, 1/4 inch. You can also get they come in regular copper, copper front, copper back, and you can also get your foils in the different widths in silverback and blackback. So it's nice to have those on hand as well. If there's foil you're not using, maybe you need it for a certain project, but you don't think you're going to use a lot of it, close it up in a Ziploc bag. That will help keep it from getting any humidity or dampness to it, and your foil will last longer. If I think of anything else, I will mention it while I'm foiling. Now, I plan on leaving this silver. So this glass is a cathedral glass and a little transparent. Because of the color, we may or may not see the back of it so obviously, but I'm going to go ahead and foil this with my 7/32 silver backed. I've got started here. You always want to look at where your pieces meet up. It's better to start and stop your foil where your pieces meet up rather than an outside edge. So I'm going to go ahead and start on the inside here on this piece. And move this back so you can see what I'm doing. You center your glass on your foil. And I have a dog, and of course dog hair gets everywhere. All right, that was hanging out a little bit for a while. I'm going to trim off that tip, get rid of it. I don't edit these videos, so if I have issues while I'm working, you're going to see the issues and you will learn, I guess, from my mistakes. All right, I push that down so it adheres, and it's not sticking very well, is it? I am going to go over the edge of this glass with my rag, see what its issue might be. I know my humidity's okay, my foil is okay. Let's just go over this piece of glass again with my rag. And we'll start this again. Don't get frustrated. Things like that happen. Rather than a little bit start on the glass, I'm going to give it a little bit more. Maybe that'll be a little more secure. Now, it's not wanting to come away from the glass for me. All right, we center our glass on that foil. Can you see there's a little bit on each side of the glass? While I'm doing this, while I'm wrapping around, I'll talk about different foilers that are available. This is just a dispenser that holds the foils. There are different hand foilers that are available and table foilers. It holds the foil and helps you center the glass on the foil for you. I've been working with glass for 40 years, and I've tried those different foilers. And all you can do, if you think they might be helpful for you, try them. I've always seemed to do better with this, with something like this, holding the foil upright for me, and then I just dispense it out as I need it, and then I wrap the glass in the foil this way. I've never had good luck with the foilers. More often than not, it wouldn't center the glass on the foil very well for me, so I would end up having to tear foil off and redo it. I'd get frustrated with that, so I just went back to using a simple dispenser like that. And while I was talking, you saw me push the edges of the foil down on the glass. Be careful around any sharp points where the foil folds over itself. It can be pretty sharp. Be careful when you're in those spots. All right, with that foiled, I'm going to come in with my fid. It's also called a lathkin. What you're going to do now is burnish. You're going to burnish the foil to the glass. Start with your outside edge and rub that down on the edge of the glass. And then, while it's on the table, push it and burnish it down to the side of the glass. When you're doing this, work towards the center of the piece, not away. so you don't accidentally push it off the glass. Do that on both sides. Now, when I was burnishing it, I saw, you can see where I overlapped the foil. I had started here, came around, and then went over, and then went to the end with the foil. It wasn't centered as well, so there's a little of that underside where it overlapped. It's sticking out. You want to trim anything like that that occurs with the foil, because once you have solder on it, it's really going to be noticeable. So you want to trim up any foil that may overhang like that. So when I've got my foil, I always have a razor blade knife with me, my fid, and a pair of shears. All right, now I'm going to trim off that little bit of foil that's sticking out. There, that's better. All right, there's our first one. Now let's do our second piece. And our second piece is also transparent, which means we can see the underside of the foil through the glass. Now we're also working on an inside curve. When you're working with inside curves and foiling them, it's always better to start and stop your foil on the inside curve. Yes, we have two pieces that meet together, so we want our foil to start and stop where glass meets up. But on curves, especially, think about it this way. You're putting something flat, which is our foil, on something curved. When you go to burnish it down, it's going to have to give somewhere, and foil will end up tearing. If you start and stop in the curve, when you go to burnish it down, the foil will go in the directions that you have the foil wrapped. If we put one piece of foil across here, there's going to be tension on the foil. And when you go to burnish it down, you're going to end up with tears in the foil. And a lot of people don't mind doing that, and they end up going with a tiny little piece of foil and then foiling over those tears. I'm just letting you know you don't have to do it that way and have to worry about repairing tears if you foil starting in your curves. Now let's foil this curve. I'm going to go ahead and wipe this glass again. All right. Tear off this extra backing, get it out of the way. Got our foil started. Now I'm going to start the foil here in the center of that curve. Now this glass is a little bit thicker. This fractures and stringers glass. We talked about that, the fractures and stringers, in the last video when we were tracing on it and cutting it. All right. Go ahead and wrap it around. Centering as I go. When you're working with a textured glass, maybe something with ripples or deep texture, deep ripples, it can be a challenge sometimes centering your glass on the foil because the glass isn't perfectly smooth. And it can also be an issue too when you're burnishing the foil down to the glass. I have a turtle sun catcher I'm working on that has some rippled green glass. I may do a foiling video just for that. so we can talk about foiling more textured glass and things you may run into, little issues. All right, I've met up with where I started my foil. I'm going to go overlap it about 1/4 of an inch or so. Trim it. Now, when I'm going to burnish the foil down with my fingers, just crimping it down, I'm going to start in the center where we started and stopped. And then I'm going to go down this going to go this direction on the curve. Okay. There's less stress on the foil if you do it that way. Okay. So the foil will want to go this direction if it feels it needs to shift. Again, we're putting something flat on something curved. Now let's go the other direction. All right, I'm going to use my fingers and I'm going to continue pushing it down on the edges of the glass all the way around. Now, this little bit, be careful on the points where the foil comes together and folds on itself. Be a little sharp. But you see how nice that turned out? No cracks, no tears in the foil. If we had a deep inside curve, it may be better to do it with an extra piece of foil. Maybe start here, come around, stop here, okay, then start with a fresh piece of foil and overlap 1/4 of an inch or so, and then do the bit here, go through that curve, and then overlap where we had started originally. That gives you even less of a chance any tearing. There would be less stress on the foil. It has more ways to give. I hope this makes sense. Sometimes it's a lot easier to do it and understand it than just to have me try and explain it to you. Say if you foiled an inside curve with one piece of foil and you saw the tears, all right, then you foiled it the way I suggest doing it, then you see it doesn't tear, then you understand. You understand more by doing. And that's always how I have learned. We learn by our mistakes, we try it another way, and then we see, well, that didn't happen. So now we learned if we try it the other way, we may have less issues. All right, now I'm going to push this down and burnish it down on the glass. Now we have some texture on the back here. And what I do is I use the side of the fid and I push into that texture with the side of the fid. Bring it around. Let's go over that there. I hope you can see what I'm doing, trying to keep my hand out of the way. All right, and there's that. Now I'm checking to see where we overlap the foil. Is there any I need to trim off with the razor blade? It looks like a tiny little bit. I'm going to go ahead and trim it off now. Once we have solder on it, it's really noticeable and harder to clean up. Can't really go over it with a razor blade once it has solder on it. See, now I'm having a hard time seeing where we started and stopped. Oh, there it is. Again, tiny little bit. All right, that's better. All right. Tear off our excess backing. Gonna go ahead and go over this glass with a rag. On this dark glass, you can see how well the grinder did. Can you see the edge? How nice that edge looks. We really don't want to see any shiny edges. Even if we thought we cut real well, there is a tiny little bit there that's shiny. That's not a concern to me. I know the foil's still going to stick to it. But if we had large patches of shiny glass, those edges could be sharp. But it's also harder for the foil to adhere to. The foil will adhere very nicely to our nice sanded edges, ground edges. Now let's foil this last piece. And again, we have an inside curve on this piece as well. We've got a lot of, this is almost straight, so our curve is here. I am going to start our foil about right here. Again, I'm looking at when we push it down on the edge, push it over the edge of the, well, and we fold it a bit. Georgie, your hair is something else. That might be coming off of my washcloth. I use old washcloths for rags. Anyway, I was saying, before I was getting the fuzz off of it, we look at our curve before we place our foil, thinking about when we push it down, where it's going to want to give, what direction it's going to want to give. So we consider that when it comes to our start and stop point. I do have a work light on my workbench, and I also have my drapes open in the room here, but I think the sun just went behind the clouds. It's always nicer when we have more sunlight when we're doing work like this, but I hope you can see all right. The shadow I'm getting, I'm having a hard time centering it. So that's why I'm kind of pausing and looking at what I'm doing. Now, I hope you can see it well. I'm trying to look in the camera, make sure I have a good shot for you, and then I'm also looking away, looking at what I'm doing, foiling here. All right, we're back to where we started. Overlap about 1/4 of an inch. All right. Crimp it down with your fingers. Go over our edge. Now, the back side of this glass is a little bit more textured. If you feel you need to, you can use the size of your fid and work it into any grooves. And there you have it. Move that out of the way. I had put my pattern in one of those sheet protectors when I was grinding. I do that with nearly everything I have as a pattern. So we'll just go ahead and lay the pieces down as they are. And you can see that we've got that ready to solder. And I will get the soldering iron warmed up, get everything ready, move the foiler out of the way and all that stuff, and then we will be back and we will solder this sun catcher. All right, I'm back. I've got my iron warmed up. I've got my sponge damp. I went ahead and pinned the pieces. Now, if you feel it's necessary, and if you're working with Homosoap board, you can also solder on thick cork board. You can use push pins to help keep your pieces in place until they're tack soldered, and that way you don't have to worry about things shifting all over. Pins really come in handy if you have lots of pieces that you need to keep in place until you get them tack soldered. We are only working with 3 here, but I wanted to give you the idea that you can use push pins and have those held in place for you. All right. Got my flux back here, got my solder. Let me grab my flux brush. It looks like I need a fresh flux brush. This one's getting kind of cruddy. All right. Flux in a couple points, on a couple points, where your pieces come together. And drop dots of solder on those places. Now we know our pieces aren't going to shift around. Go ahead and take your push pins, especially with these being plastic ones. If your iron bumps them, you're going to end up melting them. There are aluminum push pins you can get. Those come in handy. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and flux. There's enough flux on the brush already, so I'm not going to re-dip it in the bottle. Flux your outside edge and your seams. I like doing the outside edge first. And then coming in for the seam. There's different ways you can do this. You can put large solder blobs down and then warm them up and smooth them out. If you feel comfortable enough and you have a long enough seam, you can put your iron down there and then put your solder behind it and then heat it up as you go. We're going to have to go over this again anyway. I can see where there's some foil the solder's not wanting to adhere to. I'm going to give it some more flux, and we got some bubbles in the solder there. It is better to have your iron down on your glass and foil. If you're kind of gliding over the top, you don't have your iron down there, you're not going to get a nice bead. You're going to get a bead with all kinds of different marks in it. You really want it down to where you want the solder to go. And nice beading, it doesn't happen automatically. Practice. Just keep practicing. I know when I started doing stained glass, I had a lot of family members that wanted me to make them, you know, some things. Now there we've got a little bit too much solder. Even it out a little, take it back to where it was kind of low. I'm going to let that cool a little bit, and then I'm going to go over it again. But anyway, I was talking about when I first started out, I had a lot of family that wanted me to make them certain things. Well, they didn't care what it looked like. They loved it regardless. And it gave me practice. And the more I did, the better I got. And it'll work the same way for you. The more you do, the better you'll get at it. Things will come easier for you. All right, I'm going to heat this up again and go over it. No, it's not wanting to do what I want. We may let it cool and go over the back side and come back to it. Once we do one side and go to the other side, solder may drip through. You always double check both sides anyway before you think you're really done, just to see where solder might have pooled or dropped through, something like that. The glass isn't too hot. If I touch the solder, yes, that's going to be hot. I don't work with gloves. If you'd feel more comfortable working with heat-proof gloves, please do. For me, I always felt like the gloves got in the way. I want to be able to feel and touch certain things. But you have to be smart. Just like before I started soldering, I was thirsty. I went and got a sip of my Pepsi and came back. You don't want to eat or drink while you're soldering, handling lead, which our solder is made of some lead. So you just have to be smart about it. Common sense. You need to use common sense when you're working with lead and lead products. All right, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over. I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit. Let me pause it. This gives you a better view. I know it'd be better if I could have a camera that would kind of be over where I'm working. I'm trying to make do with what I have with these different tripods. I also have one of those things that you hang around your neck that holds your smartphone. So I try it in different ways. All right, like we did with the front, we don't need to tack solder because it's already held together, but we're fluxing our outside edge and our seams. All right. I like putting solder around the outside edge first. This video is meant for beginners. I'm being a little bit more detailed in with what I'm doing and what I'm saying. All right, now we're going to bead this. I should check the level of my table. These are some workbenches I got a pretty good deal on, and I had to put them together myself. But if you're working on an uneven table and you're trying to solder, you will notice solder may tend to roll or flow one direction or another. And reason I say that is it seemed like I had more solder pooling in one area. Now, if we really want to get into detail, is our floor level, then is our table level, and all that. All right, let's see. I'm going to go over it again. You can fuss too much. At some point you have to say it looks good enough, it looks nice. When you're soldering, you don't want to overdo it. If you feel like you're going over and over something, stop and let it cool down to room temperature. Your glass can get too hot and crack. I should mention also, I use a Weller 100 iron. In your reading online, you'll probably hear mention of the Wellers and the Hakko irons. I like the Wellers. Weller 80 watt is a good starter iron for stained glass. However, it is better to use with a rheostat. It is the iron itself is not temperature controlled. If you have a rheostat, you can adjust the temperature it puts out. The Weller 100s here, it is controlled, the temperature controlled by the tip. This tip that you unscrew this nut here, and then the tip comes out. You can put different tips in, and there are different temperatures. And there's also this different chisel style of the tips you can get. This particular iron, the Weller 100, comes with an 800 Fahrenheit temperature tip. Now, it's been quite a few years since I bought different tips for it. I think you can go cooler. I'm not quite sure you can go hotter. But this is 800 degrees Fahrenheit, and I find it perfect for everything I do. Maybe a little bit narrower tip you might find better. I'm happy with the big one. Once you learn how to control it for different places you need to use it, it works all right. All right, let's see how we're doing here. Looks pretty nice. I'm going to let it cool a little bit, and then we're going to do the outside edge and put a jump ring on it. So I'm going to pause while I let this cool. All right, I'm back. I've let it cool down a little bit, and now we're going to finish the outside edge and put a jump ring on it. We need to flux our outside edge. If you feel more comfortable wearing gloves, wear gloves, because your pieces can get hot. Metal conducts heat, glass conducts heat, so our pieces can get very warm while we're soldering them. All right, we've got some solder already on the edge, but we're going to need more solder to bead our outside edge. I'm going to grab a bigger piece of my solder. Now, if you're not used to seeing solder this way, I've recently moved back to the States, and I was in Europe. I was actually in Hungary. And when I would get my solder, it would come in these long pieces. They weren't in spools. So I'm still using up some of these strip pieces of solder. I'm getting the solder ready here, so when I need to get some more solder to put on the edge of the sun catcher, I don't have to mess with the spool. Actually, I don't have to mess with handling the solder. I can just pull off right here. All right, we fluxed. Yeah, okay, no bad words, Wendy. That was close. We already fluxed the outside edges. Now we want to give the edge a nice bead. And this comes with practice. It is difficult to do because we need to hold our sun catcher level, and I've already got too much solder on there. I'm going to pull some off with my iron, and I just dripped it. It's probably out of camera view. I dripped it on my table. You want to hold it still, and this is something that can only be done a little bit at a time. You can't not bead your edge fast like we do when we're soldering the sides of the sun catcher. And you have to hold it still while the solder cools. All right. It's one of those things, it's time consuming. Have some patience. Normally, I listen to music when I'm working. Might find yourself singing along And while I'm working here, my dog thinks I'm talking to myself, but I'm really talking to you, those watching my videos. And it looks like I'm getting out of the camera frame. I'll get back here so you can see what I'm doing. I hope you enjoy my videos and learn a little from them. I know that it can seem kind of boring watching a 20-minute, 30-minute how-to video, but I wouldn't be showing you all this if it wasn't important. So I hope you watch the videos in their entirety, because if you don't, you might miss something, even if it's one of my thoughts or suggestions. And again, I'm trying to keep it in frame here. Let me push my solder back a little, maybe that'll help. And you may not see it, but when my iron goes out of the screen, I'm picking up a little dot of solder and bringing it back to the sun catcher. Let me try this and see what I'm doing here. I don't remember beading that. I think that might have been some drips over the edge. All right, see, we got that drip right there. I am going to come back to the top here and start here. I feel more comfortable holding this up here than holding the tip. So that's why I'm gonna bead the other half. All right, my cord got caught up on my wire cutters, moving them out of the way. Get this back in. Oh, that came off. Let me rebend my solder. I don't edit these videos either, so you can see the oopses I make. We all make oopses when we're making things by hand. All right, try and keep that in view so you can see me picking up the little dots of solder. All right, trying to hold it level and get the little dots of solder and get them on our edge here, giving a nice beaded edge. Trying to hold it level, hold it still while the solder is setting. It's cooling. It's still going to be hot, but you want to hold it still long enough that the solder sets and won't drip before turning it. Curves and gravity. This would be much easier if we were working on something that had straight edges, but this is also how we learn. All right, I need to reposition my fingers, making sure that the glass is cool. All right. While we're soldering, I should talk about fume traps. There are different devices that you can have running while you're soldering to help with the fumes, or just make sure you have a well ventilated room. You don't want to be closed up tight in some room where the fumes build up. There are also respirators you can wear. I guess those would be people who really want to work with lead that might have respiratory problems. I see my doctor regularly. I get blood tests to check my lead level. My lead level is always within normal range. Of course, they ask why do you think, why do you need to know your lead level? Why? Well, I handle lead on a daily basis. You just have to explain that to them. That goes back to when I was talking about common sense. Use common sense when you're doing your work. But I was talking about the fumes. I have a couple fans going in my room, and that helps keep the air circulating too. All right, still warm, but I'm just kind of doing a feel. You don't want, sometimes the solder will get a little spike in it, a little sliver. You want to make sure you don't have any of those sharp slivers or points on your solder. You want them nice and smooth, especially if someone's going to purchase your work. You don't want them accidentally getting hurt. So you want to make sure all your solder is nice and smooth. And I think we did a pretty good job on that. Now, let's put the hook on. We can either do it here on this seam, or we can do it here. On my display rack, I have 3 more of these sun catchers I've done in different colors, and all of those I put the hook here. So we're going to go ahead and put that jump ring in the middle here. But it's personal preference where you want to put it. It would look, you know, imagine this hanging in a window at an angle. That would be nice too. Or just hanging from the top. All right. While I was letting the piece cool down before we started the edge, I got my jump ring ready. I did make a video short of how to make jump rings out of wire. When you solder using wire, you need wire that's solderable. Not all metal is solderable. And in this case, I have copper wire that is covered with silver. Now, this came from Germany. I purchased it while I was in Europe. But in English here, you can read that it is copper wire that is silver plated. And that is what I made the jump rings out of. And you can refer to my little video short that I made. I took the wire and I wrapped it around a flux brush. You can wrap it around anything that is like a cylinder shape, and you get all these curls. And then when you need one ring, you just need to bend one ring and cut it off with your wire cutters. Like I said, while I was letting it cool, I went ahead and got one jump ring ready. And remember what I said about metal conducting heat. We can't hold this with our fingers and solder it to our sun catcher. So I've got my pliers. And this is where we need a couple hands sometimes. Getting my left hand to hold this. Up, we had some drip through while we were soldering at one side. I'm going to have to go over that. Before we ever call that we're done, totally done, we got to double check everything, make sure it looks nice. All right. In my left hand, I've got my pliers holding that jump ring. And for our solder to take, we have to flux it. All right, a little bit of flux. We don't need to worry about the sun catcher, even though it looks like I dripped some on there. We wouldn't have had to add extra flux there. All right, my iron. And this is always the fun part, trying to hold still. Grab a little bit of solder. Drop the solder on there. Hold your hook still with your left hand while that solder sets. All right, that is not the nicest looking. We're going to continue to hold that. If we would heat up that solder without holding on to that jump ring, it will just drop down to the table. Okay, so we have to hold it while that solder is cooling. All right. Now, I'm just going to grab a tiny bit of solder. I'm going to go over the seam where it's rough. What happened was, while we were soldering this side, drip through. That was drip through the seam, and it hitting the Homosoap board. I don't think I've mentioned yet where you can get Homosoap board. Most lumber stores, any place that sells lumber in the States here, Lowe's, Menards, Home Depot, most of those places have it. Now, this Homosoap board I got at Menards. It comes in large 4-foot by 8-foot sheets. So you would have to cut it down. My work tables are 2-foot by 4-foot. So in that case, you could take one big sheet of Homosoap board, cut it down, and you can cover your work surfaces with it. And then you could also just keep smaller boards on hand if you're working on a project and you want to transport it around your room or around your house. You're able, it's a nice sturdy piece that you can have different projects going and have it on different Homosoap boards. If you live maybe in a small town that just has a lumber store and not one of the big, I'm looking at my seams here and where some solder is bubbled I want to touch up before we're completely done. I lived in a small town at one time before we had the Menardses and Home Depots, and I went to them and they didn't carry Homosoap board, but they were able to order it and get it in. So it doesn't hurt to ask. All right, I'm going to touch up here. Let that cool. All right, we never did go to the back side of where we soldered the jump ring on. You see how we've got a blob? Now we're on the back side of where we soldered that. We're going to heat that up, so it's better to get a hold of that ring. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of flux. And I don't think we need any more solder. Let's just heat up what we've got there and make it look nice. All right. And there you have it. I'm not going to show you how I wash it. Actually, all I use is dish soap and warm water. You can use your hands, you can use a sponge. You just want to wash it. What you're doing is you're washing the flux off of it. And then also your marker. When I'm done washing it with dish soap and water, I dry it, lay it on some rags. I always keep old hand towels and washcloths around. And then for finishing it and waxing it, I like to use turtle wax. It's always good to use a carnauba, however you want to pronounce it, wax. And that's the same kind of wax you use on cars. It works on metal. And I use turtle wax, and I use their thicker wax that comes in a bottle, and I also use a spray. And with a sun catcher like this that I'm leaving silver after I've washed it, then I will use the spray. And I will spray it, and I will wipe all over the glass and the solder, and what it does is it polishes it. Do one side, wipe it, go to the other side, wipe it, do your edges. Let it sit for a while, and then you can go back and just using a nice clean rag again, buff it. I compare it to if you were cleaning your car, waxing your car. You put wax on for a little while and you buff it out. And the turtle wax does well on the glass and the solder seams. All right. There is, I think I did it as a video short. It shows the two different turtle wax products that I use. So check my video shorts for how to make jump rings and then the turtle waxes I use for finishing up my glass. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and watching my videos. I appreciate you all. Thanks. Bye.